Hello, everybody. Welcome to all of you. We have our huge international community, over 7,000 people online here, and we're very excited. I'm really excited to be doing this with Dr. Bonnie Goldstein.
Hi, everybody. I look forward to seeing some familiar faces and getting to know some new people via the web.
So, it's really good to come together. This is a tough time for all of us, and even though we can't see you, we can feel you, and we're so happy that you've joined us for this webinar. Because we have over 7,000 people, just a bit of housekeeping, we won't be using the chat function or answering technology help questions, just so you know, but we will be emailing everyone a link to the recording after the webinar ends, and then you can watch it again anytime if you want to. So, Bonnie and I started brainstorming about online therapy in 2017. Our article came out in 2018, which you now have. And we're wanting to present to you today just some tips to navigate these challenges that we're all faced with in the age of coronavirus, of switching our clients from in-person therapy to online therapy. And online therapy has many forms. It can occur through email, text messaging, online chat, internet phone, or video conferencing. And what we're going to be talking about is video conferencing. Using Zoom, etc., to do therapy with your clients via video. What we're finding with our clients right now, and also with ourselves, is that these times are raising the fears and anxieties and even past traumas. Many clients need the reassurance that their anxiety and depression are reasonable responses to this big pandemic. The need for what's called social distancing, although it feels like we should really call it physical distancing because we're more in need than ever of social connection. The physical distancing, however, is depriving us of our usual resources. And there's this challenge of the uncertain outcome of the coronavirus. People are worried about their health, their finances, just the future in general. So as we've solved one problem to contain the community spread by sheltering in place, we've created others. We've created the isolation for those who live alone, the relational challenges for families. I know, Bonnie, you've talked about working with the parents who have kids home all day, and they're experiencing a lot of frustration of being together 24/7 when they're not accustomed to this.
Yeah, I have some parents who are saying, I didn't plan to have to be a breadwinner and a homeschool teacher all in the same breath, and the environment feels so challenging, and it's only been a few days. And then there are other people who are saying, I feel so isolated, even if I'm able to reach someone on the internet. What if the web breaks or I miss the human contact?
So yeah, it's affecting all of us differently. And I think many of us are also feeling things on behalf of other people. We start taking it on. So we're going to try to help you today with some sensorimotor psychotherapy approaches to working online that you can use for yourself and also with your clients. And since we have a mixture in our audience of people who have studied sensorimotor psychotherapy and people who are new to sensorimotor psychotherapy, so I just want to tell you a little bit about sensorimotor psychotherapy. It's a body-centered therapy that I founded in 1981. And we have an international institute where we teach psychotherapists and counselors and psychologists all over the world how to incorporate the body and really use the body as a vehicle for healing. So we integrate the body into our work. It's really based on the idea that everything happens through our bodies. So if we're fearful, like many of us are, it's going to affect our bodies. Some of our clients are tense like this. Others tend to collapse. Others tend to mobilize upward. And in sensorimotor psychotherapy, we're going to be working with the posture and the movement of the body to help resolve issues and presenting problems that our clients bring to us. And Bonnie's been doing this work, I think, for 20 years now, right, Bonnie? You want to say something about yourself?
Yeah, back in 2000, after having a couple of decades of working psychodynamically, when I heard Pat Ogden speak at UCLA, I started studying, looking for some tools for working with children, adolescents, and families, and people in transition from one stage of life to the next. And over the years, I've become so immersed in the body-based work that this webinar and all of the papers Pat and I have done naturally flew. And as our community in Los Angeles grows and the agency that I work with, we have a whole series of different groups and individuals and families that are utilizing the foundations of sensorimotor psychotherapy and the somatic wisdom, getting beneath the narrative to what's happening inside the body.
And so we're used to doing this work in person, you know, where it's easy to track the body, it's easy to stand up and work with movement, et cetera. It presents some challenges online. And, you know, many of our therapists have said, you know, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to do this work. It's not going to be effective in this new online modality. And there are challenges, right? There's challenges of maintaining this consistency and security of an in-person therapy. There's challenges of feeling connected and resonant together. That's much more available in in-person therapy. And there's some real challenges with the body, tracking the body, working with the body, you know, again, movement and posture and body sensation. There are some challenges, but there are ways through that to make sensorimotor psychotherapy very successful online. I think the first thing to consider, Bonnie's going to talk about it, is really setting up your office in a way that's conducive to this work.
So many of us already in these last few days have seen our home environments in a different light and are starting to do things to make it our own, to deepen into what the environment could possibly be. And similarly, as we take our practices into our home and we start to think about the lighting and we start to think about the props that we might have used in our office, and we think about how to create a cozy space, candlelight perhaps, we're modeling for our clients so that they're able to see and start to think about their own environment. We want to create a frame, a cocoon in a sense. So we encourage our clients to think about the privacy issues and where they can go in their home that is quiet and alone. One client said that she needed to work in the bathroom. It was the one place she could leave everybody out. And wherever it is that you need to create and help your clients to create, it's with the intention of having privacy, sometimes headphones help for that purpose so that you're able to really have a sense of safety and a sense of containment, but also remembering that our clients are seeing our environment perhaps for the first time. So there's going to be a body-based shift that happens. There might be feelings that come up specifically about the frame. So many of us have clients who go to a certain chair in the certain side of the room each time, and now they have to rethink that. And they see us differently and they see themselves differently. Also, when we're doing therapy, often they're watching themselves, something that doesn't happen live in the session. They're seeing themselves on the screen alongside ourselves. So that creates yet another element. So we want to create this peaceful, quiet, inviting atmosphere where there's room. We also want to encourage space. We have these rolling chairs, lots of space, because with the body-based work, we want to invite in that. We want to invite in a sense of what's happening inside so that we as therapists can track our clients, so we can notice their postures and the gestures that they make. Also, we want to be aware of our body with respect to the screen. Like, take a minute and look. If my hands are up here, it's very invasive. And if my face is up here, it might also be a problem. On the other hand, if I'm back here, there might be a disconnect. My face is so much smaller. And either way, negotiating the space with our clients, asking our clients what they would want, being aware of what feels good to them, sitting back further, moving forward. All of this is the visual landscape of the therapy room that happens before we begin the session. And of course, the lighting. I've had clients who've said they don't want the lights bright. They don't want me to see their face. Rather, a shadow would be better. And others will say to me, you're not close enough. Could you turn on the light? I really want to engage. I want to see your eyes. So we want to think about these elements as we set up the environment. Pat?
I think what I would suggest is that you have an environment that's predictable for your client every time. Like for me, I would work in this space every single time. So it's predictable, they can count on it. It's like coming to your virtual office. You don't, if you can not change it, sometimes working in this room, sometimes working in that room, it can give them a real sense of security and containment. One of the elements that is important that Bonnie alluded to was to collaborate with your client to establish a visual picture that will be your norm in terms of your proximity. Just like in-person therapy and sensorimotor psychotherapy, we'll often say to clients, where would you prefer I sit? How close, how far would I be? And sometimes they say, well, I don't know, it's fine where you are. And I might say, well, let's try it out. So notice yourselves right now. Like if I move, if you're my client and I'm further away, would you prefer a little more distance? Or would you prefer a little more closeness? Some clients would want me much closer. So we experiment with that. Like what happens when I'm closer? What happens when I'm further away? This is why the rolling chairs are so important. It gives you that opportunity to move in and to move out. So with most of our clients, we develop a kind of a default position. Like maybe this is the degree of the visual picture that they would like for me, where they can see my head and my shoulders, but not my full body. And then we talk about, well, okay, and that might be adjusted at different times. Like we'll move back sometimes, closer sometimes, and we'll keep collaborating about this. Other considerations having to do with the body, we want to just tune into our clients and collaborate with them and discuss the challenges of a body-oriented approach. I might ask my clients to stay aware of their body and be sure to tell me what's going on in your body, especially if it's not visible. So we share the responsibility there. I might say, I'm going to be asking maybe more questions than usual about your body, because I want to always be able to see your whole body. And you can tell me if that gets uncomfortable. And I also might suggest that, or say that maybe sometimes I'll be sensing in my body, and I'll check that out with you, because our bodies are our instruments. We often feel things in our own bodies that the clients are sensing even before they say. So I might say, when you're talking about your anxiety and how alone you are right now with this quarantine, I notice my stomach is starting to tense. Are you experiencing that as well? So we elaborate our tracking through verbal questioning and sharing, as well as, of course, tracking and noticing what we can visually. Bonnie had mentioned props, and this is so critical in sensorimotor psychotherapy. We'll often ask our clients to have some pillows nearby, because we might be working with pillows. If you have a big therapy ball, like you can see in my office here, a big therapy ball, have that nearby. Have a drum. Many times we're using drums to communicate, especially when there are feelings that don't have words. So when we're working with families or couples, we might use a drumming to communicate rhythm back and forth. It doesn't have to be a drum. It can be like, even just on the table to be able to tap out feelings, etc. And we'll also, Bonnie had mentioned this, that we want to really realize how we come across, which is different online. Like if I am working with posture and movement and gesture and just staying in this position, you can see, like if I'm reaching out to you, if I'm pushing away, it's going to come across very differently if we're too close to the computer. And it can even, one client said, it can feel like monstrous when somebody starts moving their hands when they're too close to the computer. So we might move back when we're demonstrating different gestures, like reaching or pushing or other kinds of motions, which we'll be talking about. And I think one of the challenges online is really communicating empathy and emotional resonance, which is so critical. The clients need a compassionate other, the therapist, to attune, accept, and hold their own vulnerability, their anxiety, their distress in these times. And our emotional resonance is communicated through our facial expressions, through the way we use our voice, and through our movement. So we need to pay a little bit more attention to that in online therapy, to conveying that emotional resonance. We want to make sure our faces are visible. Sometimes I might just lean in a little bit if a client's, starting to feel vulnerable or cry. Might increase the nonverbal sounds, like, oh, yeah. Just the sounds to let them know we're really with them. Sometimes you can even negotiate with a client, like when they're distressed, how can I support them as a therapist? Do they want me to lean in a little bit more? Do they need me to be more contactful with my words or my statements of resonance? Like, oh, it really hurts. It's super anxious right now. Reflecting back to them. And then, of course, the most important thing always in sensorimotor psychotherapy is to track your client's response and then adjust. Like if you lean in and you see them tighten up, you might just pull back, or you might name that, oh, when I leaned in, you seemed to tighten up. That's not quite right, huh? And then you'll sit back a little bit. So you got to very much track their response, name what you see, and adjust your posture, your voice, the frequency of your statements, etc., to really meet them with empathy as needed. Ritual is important too. Bonnie's going to talk a little bit about ritual and predictability.
So when we think about the continuity that Pat was just describing, the stability of the same office. We also want to think about how we begin our session. We're working and we're racing from one session to the next, and we're at home now, so there are all of those distractions. We need to calm ourselves. We need to spend that time to take the breath, to notice what's happening, and then we can model that for our clients. As our clients come in, some clients are so speedy that we want to collaborate together, saying, I notice it seems like there's a lot going on. How should we join together in this room? And we can start to come up with a ritual. One client that I have, if I were to tell her, take a breath, she would shut me down completely. But when I say, what do we need to do so that you can come into the room, into this space, and leave some of the other things behind? And she loved that analogy. Metaphorically, she would take and leave outside the office some of the burden that she would say she was carrying. And this just happened. She would say that there was a movement she could make to leave things behind. So at our second session, I'm remembering this movement, and it became part of a ritual that she and I had with other clients, especially at these times where they feel so demoralized or so shut in or shut down. They often have a hard time getting out of bed, even for our therapy session. So I'll encourage them, let's take the laptop or the computer screen and let's move it out of where you sleep to a different location. I'm always encouraging a larger screen. Television monitor would be ideal, or a large computer screen for our clients as well as for ourselves, so that we can catch some of these body responses. But when we look at the rituals that we're co-creating, and it really is that, it's helping the client to think about what will help them, what will calm them, what will let them be present, or if they're feeling immobilized, what will bring them up into the room, into engagement. Coffee or tea is a wonderful thing to encourage. They can go get their libation, they can come join us, and that can change everything. And that sense of aloneness, when we look at those rituals that we're creating, we can also encourage that for other people in their lives, helping them to do so. Because what we're looking for is creating a sense of mindful awareness of what's happening inside the body, inside our bodies, so that we can model that for our clients, and inside our clients and how they're feeling. Often when I have a client who's a little more sluggish, I find myself mobilizing more, a little more high arousal on my part or high energy. And I need to sit back, maybe even name it, say, I'm aware of this. Just notice what happens between us. So it brings our relationship into the session, even in those earliest moments when we're trying to create ritual together, predictability together, and helping our clients to settle in that predictability. And another example of that, and I'll speak later about breath, is perhaps taking some form of ritual, be it a few breaths together, lighting a candle. I always have a candle lit in our office and now in the home office. Encouraging that with our client becomes a ritual of, okay, these are the things I'm doing. We'll call it therapy hygiene, the things we do prior to sitting in the therapist's chair that can create a presence and can work towards establishing what we'll call an invisible cord between ourselves and our clients, even though there's such a long distance.
I think that's really the key for these beginning and ending rituals that you establish with your clients, is that you're doing it together. So you're joining. We know how important joining is as therapists. And the ritual, something special that the two of you decide, this is your special ritual. Whether you're going to, meditate for a few minutes, take a body scan, take a breath, whatever it is, it's something that connects the two of you to start a session, and then having a ritual at the end. We usually have these naturally anyway in our in office, in-person therapies, right? Establishing them online, it creates that safe container for our clients. I think one of the things that we're all dealing with now is the dysregulation, maybe in ourselves, definitely in our clients. Is so much uncertainty. I think of, there's a quote from The Inferno by Dante that I've always loved. He says, in the middle of the road of my life, I awoke in a dark wood and the true way was wholly lost. I mean, that's a feeling I think most of us are feeling now to some degree. And what happens for many of our clients is that they're dysregulated. So if we think about that window of arousal tolerance, many of our clients are outside the window. They're either hyper aroused with anxiety and thoughts of the future and panic, or they're hypo aroused, like Bonnie was saying, not being able to be motivated, not getting out of bed, and so forth. So we attend to this physiological dysregulation by helping clients find physical resources, bodily resources, gestures, movements, postures that help bring their arousal into that window. That's often the first order of business. I think one of the things that we're all having to deal with in this age of coronavirus is the distancing and the isolation. Instead of physical touch being a nourishing, welcome thing, there's this sudden fear of touch. We don't want to get too close to people. We don't want to be breathed on. We don't want to shake hands or hug. I was reading David White, and he said something that is absolutely necessary for human beings becomes something that brings not promise or solace or condolence, but possible closeness to illness and death. So we're deprived of this very, very primary resource of physical contact, even shaking our hands with our clients. So one of the ways that we can work with that in sensorimotor psychotherapy is through self-touch. Self-touch is something babies do automatically to soothe themselves, and we can work with that with our clients online. And I think we want to remember that there's no right way to self-touch for soothing. For every client, it's different. So often, we'll say to a client, let's find a way that you can use your own touch to soothe yourself, to calm that anxiety. And sometimes they'll show it to us. Sometimes you'll see them hugging themselves, or you'll see them with their hand on their heart. If they're showing us a somatic resource they're already doing, then we can do it with them. We can say, oh, I noticed, yeah, your hand's coming to your heart. Maybe we should focus on that. Let's do that together. Again, with the emphasis on together. Other times, if they're not demonstrating some sort of resource, we can play with it. We can say, try this with me. And even right now, you all can try it with me and find one that works the best for you. This is what I would do with the client. I would say, maybe why don't we just start just bringing our hands to our hearts, and let's see what happens. And in that statement, let's see what happens, we're eliciting mindfulness. And sensorimotor psychotherapy is really founded on mindfulness. So what happens? What happens in your body? What happens in your emotions? What happens with that anxiety? And then a client will say, well, it felt good. It felt warm. And I might say, well, should we stay with that one, or should we try another? Maybe we'll experiment with several. So we'll just go through this. Maybe one hand on the heart, one hand on the belly is more calming or more soothing. And maybe both hands on the belly. Maybe a hug. I think the critical thing is that we're doing this with our clients. So we're experience it together until we start to find some form of self-touch that really helps the client calm down. And then that can become a resource that they can take with them. They can try this self-touch, this self-hug. Sometimes it can turn into a movement, a rocking, so forth, until they start to really settle themselves down. Maybe Bonnie, you can demonstrate how you might do that with a pillow. I know you've got a big pillow ready to go here.
So we have in our offices so many pillows. Clients can cocoon in the pillows, they can pile them up. But when we're working online, we want to encourage the same thing, to have the big pillows, to have the smaller pillows, and all kinds of fuzzies, this fuzzy little blanket, different things that they can use so that they can give themselves the very hug, the very nurturing that they're not able to receive from others right now. I know during World War II, one of the biggest challenges with the loss, as we know, there were so many people who were struggling, but they had each other. They got together in community. Families were together for dinner. And as Pat was just saying, we don't have that right now. We have this isolation. And there's something very magical about taking a really big pillow and giving it a hug in place of a person, or a body, big body pillow, that's another one, or piling them up on top, the containment that happens, or weighted blankets, which give a sense of that kind of cocoon.
And I think, like when Bonnie was hugging her pillow, you know, if she's hugging a pillow and a client is hugging a pillow, you know, there's a real resonance. Mirror neurons are starting to fire, and there's a real connection when you're doing it together. I want to say something just a little bit more about mindfulness before and Bonnie's going to talk about breath. I have found that one of the benefits of mindfulness right now in this time is for all of us to track our responses to our activities. There's a danger of getting involved in sharing COVID-19 news, like how many deaths there have been, how many new cases, et cetera. Clients will bring this up, and there's this temptation to just go down that path. And often we need, with our clients, to go down it a little bit to get that connection. But we can use mindfulness here to observe our reactions, like what happens in us when we start the snowballing conversation about COVID-19? What happens to our heart rate? What happens to our bodies? What happens to our anxieties, our thoughts? If many clients are compulsively on the news feeds right now, watching the progression of the coronavirus, and I would encourage them to notice how that affects you and then make some choices about it. And the key here is choice, not control. Like I know I've heard people say, I've just got to control myself. And it's not so much about control, but realizing that you always have a choice. That's critical in trauma where choice is lost. And we can help clients use mindfulness to notice how they respond. For example, when they're talking obsessively about the virus, noticing their body, their emotions, their minds, their sleep patterns, and then make a choice. Do they want that for themselves, or do they want to put themselves on a news diet, a sensory diet? Bonnie alluded to this, especially at nighttime. Like I know I've worked with some people about put your computer away like a half hour at least before you go to bed. Stay off the news feeds. Do something nourishing, comforting for your body, self-soothing, rocking, a little bit of yin yoga, something to calm yourself down. And when they use mindfulness to notice the effects of their news diet or whatever it is they need, it's a sense of empowerment. We have little control right now over many things, but we do have control to some degree over our own body-mind. It's like that quote from Moshe Feldenkrais, you can't do what you want till you know what you're doing. So through mindfulness, our clients can see, well, when they're watching news obsessively, they can be aware of what it does to them and then make another choice. And breath is a great resource for that too, Bonnie.
So
Yeah,
when
you
we're
talk about that?
So when we're staying mindful of those moment-to-moment interactions, body to body with our clients, breath often becomes one of the arenas that we can look at together. So often when there's trauma, we stop breathing, or we start rapidly breathing, or calming our breath becomes a problem, and name it and aiming our work at collaboratively looking at the breath becomes very triggering for some. How many of you have ever been told, stop, don't do that, you're getting too anxious, or look at your breath, you've got to calm down? Those kind of comments often make us more anxious, and our breath becomes even more shaky. When the diaphragm's tight, it's often hard to force a breath. So instead, if we can look at and notice the breath and be curious, I might say, I'm curious. As we're working together, it seems like you're having a hard time catching a breath. One little boy that I'm thinking of, he pulled out the collar of his shirt and he would be grasping for breath. But as he did that, I noticed that his shoulders were tight. He was having a hard time breathing. So together, we were able to work at that. I said, I have a trick, I have an idea. What would happen if you open your shoulders wide? In fact, as you're watching this now, why don't you try that? Opening your shoulders and just notice what happens inside your body. It may feel more spacious. There's breath there. On the other hand, you may feel too vulnerable. One client said, I can only do this if I'm wearing a blanket or a poncho. And we always have ropes and blankets and things you can wrap. I would recommend people do that. Similar here, where you're able to wrap up and protect, even on the screen as we're working together. And then I can open up, but not feel the vulnerability here. And then notice what happens in that shift. I'm thinking of
Bonnie, let me just capitalize on that a little bit, because we already got a question about how do you convey a touch and a holding environment to the client. And what Bonnie just demonstrated with that scarf, like do that scarf again, Bonnie, that you had, because when she put that scarf around her shoulders, this is something we can do together with our clients. And then she can pull it tight around her shoulders. I beg your pardon?
I said, as they see me doing it, they can find something and do it that way, just as they were doing the breath. They can join.
That's right.
Yeah.
And you can pull it tight, and it gives that containment, like not just loose, but you can pull it tight. And when you're doing it together, again, it gives almost the feeling of touch, yeah, and containment.
With the breath, with these props, there are so many ways you can play. Also, pushing our chair further back so we can see more easily what's happening. The opening. Another client, she would do this. She was so nervous. And so as she noticed her breath, she could see the shifts that were happening. And I was able to notice that as well. That's why it's wonderful to be able to move back from the screen, come forward, try on a different posture. You could even, with this breath, stand up. The poet Mary Oliver says, listen, are you breathing just a little and calling it a life? So many of us are forgetting to pay attention to that which comes so naturally. So through the lens of sensory motor psychotherapy, we're looking to expand and notice what happens, but most importantly, then we can be curious in the aftermath of a new pattern or of a shift. In the aftermath of that breath, we're able to take a minute and see what's happening now. Those of you who are noticing your breath or opening your shoulders, perhaps you might know a change. We're about not quite halfway through our time together, and you may be feeling that shift. So as we take a breath and notice the breath, we can see what happens inside our body. And that's also important, as Pat mentioned, with those rituals promoting sleep. In these trauma times, often sleep eludes us, and breath becomes yet another way that we can access a calming in our body. One of our colleagues on the board at Sensoriomotor Psychotherapy, Steve Porges, he speaks about taking a breath in and then exhaling with a much longer breath than you inhale. And that allows for you to relax, and the sympathetic arousal system shifts, and you can become more contained and calm. For some of us, we may find that works. Also, as we go to sleep, the thermal regulation, noticing the heat in our rooms. That also has to do with our offices, being aware that if we're working, we want to ask our clients, is the room that they're in the right temperature? We may work that together when we're doing live sessions, but bringing attention to that. And then again, always going back to the breathing as the foundational resource to be able to then help our clients as they work.
I like that about asking clients to pay attention to the temperature in their room, because we're really communicating a value of the body. You know, is your environment the right temperature for you? Is it safe for you? Is it private? It validates the body. I want to add about breath that with all these resources, there's no one size fits all. If a client, and many traumatized clients have very tight diaphragms. Many people who are anxious, their diaphragm is very tight. So suggesting a deep breath can be frustrating for them. Deep breath isn't always resourcing. Sometimes breathing deeply actually stimulates the dorsal vagal response because it's a calming, activating the parasympathetic system. And for clients who feel fear when their dorsal vagal system is stimulated, deep breaths can escalate their anxiety. So just want to emphasize, with all these resources, there's no ever one size fits all. It's very individual. And like Bonnie was saying, you want to discover with your client what the right resource is for them. One of the ones that we work with a lot in sensorimotor psychotherapy is posture. And many have already said, well, how can you do that online? Because you can't walk around the room with your clients, you can't stand up together, but you really can. And the value of working with posture, I think is really just big. There's a lot of value, because every resource depends on posture to some degree. If our posture is slumped, like just try on this slumped posture with me. Like just let your body, can you see me? Let your body just slump and then try to take a deep breath. You can't really, right? If your posture is mobilized like this, like it's also hard to take a deep breath. Yeah, it's hard to reach out. It's hard to self-soothe. So there's quite a bit of research now on posture, and one that always speaks to me is that they found that subjects who received good news in an upright posture experienced much more pride and esteem than subjects who received good news in a slumped posture. So we can connect that with what we're having to deal with today. If we're receiving the news that we're getting right now about this virus, and our bodies are slumped or tight, that's going to de-resource us. Yeah? If we can help our clients find a more aligned posture. I think one of the ways that I found that can be helpful with this is to, again, come back to the element of choice. Like ask clients, well, how do you want to respond? Some clients will say, well, I want to have courage with this. You know, I want to be more centered. I want to be more calm. And then we can use that then to find a posture or movement that supports their desire. Janine and I, in our book on sensorimotor psychotherapy interventions, we have a worksheet in that book. I think it's called Your Best Self, where we really explore how clients can live in their bodies to bring about and support how they want to be in the world. So with posture, we often with clients will say, well, you know, let's stand up together. That's why you want to have these rolling chairs in a big office, because you can stand up and try on different postures. I might say, let's try this on together. Like, you know, when you think of what's bothering you right now, usually it's the virus. Like, think of it in this posture. And just think of it and notice what starts to happen inside. And then they report back to me. You can try this on right now if you want to. Like if you think of this pandemic and slump, what happens? If you think of it and tighten up, what happens? If you think of it and mobilize upward, like as if you're just trying to rise above it, like what happens? So it's a self-discovery process. And usually clients find that they respond the best when their body is aligned like this, not like this, or like this. When the body's fairly aligned, their shoulders are down. They can maintain a relaxed kind of erect uprightness. You know? Sometimes clients will want to go back and forth, like, yeah, of hunching or collapsing, rising up, and then find a place in the middle that's right for them, that's most resourcing for them, because they need this more than ever in the age of coronavirus. And then we can practice that sitting. And I know, like with our article, Bonnie, remember we had the client and Leah in our article. We said, let's both stand up and walk around a little bit with this new posture. Just walk around your office. I'll walk around mine. And let's see how it is moving and walking. So we're doing it together. We might not be in full visual connection, but we're still experiencing the movement, yeah? And when you're standing, you can do all kinds of movements. You can do big opening movements, like Bonnie was demonstrating with the breath. You can do boundary movements, setting a boundary around yourself. So don't limit yourself just because you're online. You can still work really effectively with the body. You want to add anything, Bonnie?
So these are traumatizing times. And so often, as Pat was describing, these exercises are so useful to help our clients who've become immobilized or whose actions have shifted because there's an instinctive urge that no longer can happen. And they freeze, they collapse. Sometimes the action that wants to happen doesn't happen. So what we're working on, as Pat was describing so beautifully, is helping to reinstate these active responses. Earlier, I spoke about the breath. We're reworking a traumatic memory that often is triggered again in these times with the virus. And we're looking at an impulse that may have wanted to happen that didn't happen. One example of that would be the push. Often when there's trauma, that which we wish we could do, or the instinct, is truncated, so we're unable to do this movement. So together, albeit in separate rooms across the webinar, that kind of a push can be practiced. It can be practiced by using space in the room. We can grab our exercise ball and work with them. You can encourage them, as I am now, to push against the wall, to push and be able to really notice what happens in their body, especially if this is a movement that in our office we might do live, where I'm pushing against the pillow, my client's on the other side, or I'm pushing against the ball, or hand to hand. None of those things can happen when we're working online. So instead, what we're doing is we're inviting in a new way to work. And there's a whole plethora of options that can help with pushing, including pushing as a push-up. I have one father who says he gets so angry, he can feel the rage. And we have an agreement that he just drops it and does a push-up or 2 or 10. And that allows him to push out the rage. And then we shift it. We have him push hard in that plank position, but not do the push-up, and notice what happens there. And after pushing for a minute in plank, he says he can feel in his body a shift. And then that's where the sensorimotor psychotherapy comes in, because we want to understand the meaning of that shift, where in his body he feels that shift, what the aftermath of pushing would be, pushing against the wall, pushing against the floor. Another way of pushing could be pushing against our legs. And as I back up, you can see this push. Why don't you all try this? Pushing against your own legs. You can feel your feet ground, your arms ground. I feel my posture shifting. Now, if you're doing this with your client and encouraging it with your client, the two of you together can notice. We can ask what you notice. We can ask them to take a look at us, especially if they're not comfortable doing a movement. We can be the model of that. And then coming forth. I know when I'm pushing against my legs and the knees and the upper part of my knees, I can feel my arms start to shake and tingle. I can feel the heels ground in. I can feel my alignment shift. And that's taking over a new way in our body that otherwise might not be in effect. Also, with that grounding, what we're able to do is help them to get a sense of being with me right here, right now. Because so often, even if they're present, they're not present. So it's an exercise in mindfulness, in helping them to ground themselves, in setting up what we will say is a deeper sense of relation to themselves and also to one another. And then one more piece of that would be to help them ground themselves by finding something in the room of meaning that works for them. And yoga altar is an example of what one client has set up, where she lights her incense or her aromatherapy candle, and she's able to think about that even when she's not in that room. She carries that with her. She's able to orient to something that allows her to calm, to relax, to do what Pat was saying, is we try to help to regulate and understand and empower ourselves even in the midst of this trauma.
Great, yeah. You know, I want to come back to the pushing that Bonnie's talking about, because it's so essential. Because what's happening with our clients now with this current crisis is that their past traumas are coming up, and the past traumas often elicited immobility responses, freezing and collapse. And so they're starting to go back into some of those responses, or they're going back into dysregulated active responses. Like I was talking to one person who is just, he said, I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling like I want to throw furniture again. And that had been over for him for quite a while, but it's triggering his combat trauma. So we can work with this pushing to help regulate overactive instinctive fight responses that are stimulated in trauma, and also to mitigate those immobilizing responses. And if you can, in your office, set it up in such a way that clients can fully see your body as you're pushing against the wall, and you can see theirs. because then you can, if they have a ball like this or a pillow against the wall, you can start helping them push. Like what happens, and you can track them. They can see what you're doing. Like sometimes they'll be leaning like this, which is not a push. So you can say, you know, put one foot behind, like me. Can you see my body? And push, whoops, push in a way that really feels good to you. Bring your feet from the bottom and push from the bottoms of your feet out through your arms. And you're helping them find a way to like reinstate that response in a way that feels really good to them. And you can teach them and educate them as you're doing it together, right? And I don't want to underestimate a flight response as well, because that's a natural instinctive response that we feel in the face of threat. Often clients, especially with the quarantine, they're feeling trapped, like we can't get away, we're trapped. Some people who are, you know, isolated or alone are feeling very much trapped without contact. So we can help like reinstate a flight response by just saying, you know what, let's stand, let's feel our legs. Let's just feel the capacity of our legs to carry us towards something we want, away from something we don't want. Maybe orient towards something pleasurable in their own room and feel how their legs can carry them towards that. Yeah. That's very different from just saying you're not trapped anymore, because it's a bodily felt sense of movement. And I think that's really essential.
And you know, there's one more piece of that, which is some people find that they are so activated, they heard that there'd be shortages, they run around the city, they can't stop moving, they create programs, they cannot stop and yield. So we want to also invite that in. And sometimes just saying to our clients, let's just take a minute and lean back in the chair as I'm doing now. Let's just drop into the couch or notice what happens when you drop your head back. That gives them permission to do what was a missing experience otherwise, that they hadn't taken time to do that. Or some of our people who are so busy taking care of others in this crisis are unable to let go. They're mobilized. They're in such high arousal, which they say they need to do. I have one client who says she only feels safe when she's in action. So when the action stops and the quiet happens, this yield becomes so important for her. I'm thinking as you're watching now, maybe just sitting in the chair or couch or wherever you're watching, take a minute just to notice and let your head be supported. Let your whole body feel the support of being carried and contained, because that may be the missing experience as well.
Great, I think that's true. I think that yielding, that letting go is hard found these days for many people. So that's something also to work with. Let's talk a little bit about proximity seeking. Many people are isolated. Yeah? Being able to reach out and connect with others is truncated in some degree. And especially, I think, for certain populations, there's a great stigma right now, which is always common in disease outbreaks, where the virus is associated with Asian people, Chinese people. I was talking to a person a week or two ago who's Asian, and she was saying that now there's even more microaggression, more discrimination that she's feeling towards her. And as she was talking, her body is tightening up and pulling in and withdrawing. And so for her and for many, proximity seeking actions, creating ways of connection, of reaching out, of eye contact, of moving towards. John Golby had coined that phrase, proximity seeking action, to talk about how humans and babies naturally seek proximity with their attachment figures. So we work with that online too. And again, it requires moving our chair back, right? And we practice reaching out. Like, what happens as I extend towards you? What happens as you reach back? And what happens if we come a little closer, if we move a little further? What happens if we make eye contact even through the screen? How close should I be where you can feel that proximity? So we might assume that we can't do these things online, but we can. And I think it's really, that's a very, very important resource at these times. We've really been talking about that all throughout this webinar, about ways to resonate and connect and create these kind of experiments that bring you and your client close together.
And if we look at what Pat so beautifully was describing, that need to reach out and also that need to take and to pull, another way we can work with that in our office, we might take a rope or take a yarn and pull, but now you can have our clients hook this on and then they can pull it home, hooking it onto a chair or the back of the chair. And there's something very powerful about that action, about that pulling action, even if it's done with an object by hooking it on to a rod or a chair. It allows us to reach and experience that. And then asking our clients, because one client that I'm thinking of, she said she doesn't know how to take for herself. She doesn't know how to reach out to others. She's able to offer, but she doesn't know how to take in. And this becomes a real somatic way to do that. And then we look at the meaning therein. And this action, which allowed her to do that, then led to her being able to discuss and process with her family that very action.
Yeah, I think what Bonnie's talking about is like the sequence of action that Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen often has elucidated for us. Like, there's a reach, and then a grasp, and a pull. And that you can practice that via these video conferencing, reaching for something, grasping it, holding on, and then pulling it towards. And you can, like Bonnie said, practice that pulling with the rope. I think what all these are, these little somatic exercises are just helping clients connect with themselves, use their body as a resource, connect with us, and hopefully process some of the reactions that they're having these days. And Bonnie had mentioned loss. I think many of us are feeling a loss. David White. I've been reading him a lot lately. He wrote something about that the coronavirus is a test of our resilience in dealing with this loss, and also our ability to literally reach out to others as partners, as family members, as neighbors, and as community. He says the measure of our resilience and our robust vulnerability, he calls it, will not just be as individuals, but as fellow compassionate citizens of loss. And I think through this loss, the connection is so vital because it just helps to mitigate that aloneness. So with reaching out to others in any way that we can, I think the preoccupation with the virus and with ourselves can actually be de-resourcing, right? So depression and anxiety kind of do that to us. They make us turn inward sometimes and isolate. We can excessively focus on the distress. um, you know, I went for a walk this morning and I was so touched by this little 6-year-old girl in my neighborhood. It was a beautiful day today. She had the big pieces of chalk that kids have, and she wrote on the sidewalk. It almost makes me cry. She wrote, "We are all in this together." And how beautiful that this little 6-year-old was doing her part for the neighborhood. And I think that we can all find ways to reach out like little Eve did, to do our part, to, you know, to reach out to others. The people who are getting hit the most right now are marginalized communities, immigrants, people of color, refugees, people who are disabled, the homeless people. And we can do our part with that. We can contribute to food banks, delivering food if we're not at risk ourselves. We can provide even mental health services. Some people are providing that pro bono online. It can be as simple as not hoarding food, right? Leaving enough for everybody. So that reaching out extends beyond just reaching out to our immediate people, to really doing the part in our communities to the people who are suffering the most, can mitigate our own distress. There's research that supports this, that as we reach to others, as we do something for others, it is as nourishing, if not more so, to ourselves than it is to the other person.
We're seeing that in our being here today in Los Angeles over the course of the last 4 days since they've closed down the city, more opportunities to connect online, a plethora of opportunities to serve others in so many ways. We are really joining together as a community in an unbelievable manner. It's beautiful to watch. I know we thank you for being part of this community today. Please let people know so that they can also join in, because the recording can be viewed. And we're aware that people in their isolation, as Pat was just mentioning, are grasping to be in community. Some of the groups, we are going to be doing a webinar together, Pat and I, on working with 2+. So that would be working with families online, working with groups online. We're looking at a way of taking what is our new normal and shifting it and empowering us. I think I'll end with that quote by C.S. Lewis. He says, "Friendship is born when one says to another, 'What? You too? I thought I was the only one.'" So many of us may feel that sense of, I'm the only one who's feeling lonely or isolated or alone. So I thank all of you who are going out and helping others in your communities, who are doing this work and staying with your clients on their journey, alongside doing your own work to navigate this unprecedented situation. I thank you all for being here. And Pat, I thank you so much for laying the foundation for today and for all of us to continue to learn and to grow.
Yeah, thank you too, Bonnie. It's always great teaching with you and collaborating together. And I love that C.S. Lewis quote. You know, I think we're so dependent on each other. And I think if the good comes out of this situation we're in, it's that this dependency is really felt in a very, very different way. We're often dependent on connections right now that we can't touch and that we might not even see. I think there's a great need in times like this to connect to something bigger than ourselves, to remind ourselves that we belong to something larger than just ourselves. As I was looking for inspiration for this webinar, I came across a poem by John O'Donohue, and there's a line from it that I want to leave you with that really spoke to me. He says, "May you allow the wild beauty of the invisible of the invisible world to gather you, to mind you, and to embrace you in belonging. And I think we're called to that right now, to feel our sense of belonging as we're quarantined in our own homes. And so we want to reach out, continue to reach out to you. SBI will be finding more ways to connect with you, and more ways to support one another through this crisis. So stay tuned to us and please stay in touch. We look forward to hearing from you. And thank you so much for connecting with us today. Can't see you, but I can feel you and your dedication and your commitment. Thank you.
Thank you.